Do you believe that good and evil exist?
There are things I consider to be good or evil, so I suppose the answer to this question would be yes.
The answer to this question separates Judeo-Christian values from secular values.
And is there any overlap between those two? In fact, what are secular values? I am a secularist. I value free speech. Is free speech a secular value? Because there are people who are secular that do not value free speech. Secular values are not a specific set of values, nor is Judeo-Christian a specific set of values, because there are lots of people saying they propose Judeo-Christian values, and they're proposing different values. Perhaps now would be a good time to outline specifically what values you are referring to.
Let me offer the clearest possible example. Murder. Is murder wrong?
Yes.
Is it evil?
Is there a distinction to be made between evil and wrong? Because you should probably define that.
Nearly everyone would answer yes, but now I will pose a much harder question. How do you know?
I value human life. I value autonomy. Murdering someone deprives them of both their life and their autonomy. Murder is therefore antithetical to the maximization of my values, which I consider wrong, and I do not distinguish between wrong and evil, so murder is evil.
I'm sure you think murder is wrong, but how do you know?
I know what my values are, I know what murder is, so I know what my position on murder is. Anything beyond that is irrelevant to me.
If I asked you how you know that the Earth is round, you would show me photographs from outer space or offer me measurable data. But what photographs could you show? What measurements could you provide that prove that murder or rape or theft is wrong?
We are not going to make any headway until you define what wrong is. I would consider something to be wrong if it causes unnecessary suffering, as murder, rape, and theft do. Granted, that's not an exhaustive coverage of my position on morality, but even with a definition as incomplete as that, I have gone much further into making my case than you have. Given my definition of wrong, murder, rape, and theft are wrong.
The fact is, you can't.
I did.
There are scientific facts, but without God, there are no moral facts.
All right, we are making slow, painful headway. So you have in some way defined your morality based on God. The question then goes to, why have you done this, and why should others do this?
In a secular world, there can only be opinions about morality. They may be personal opinions or society's opinions, but only opinions.
As opposed to a theistic world, where there are God's opinions. So, why do I need to value God's opinions? Or is it not an opinion when God has an opinion? All right, then why do I need to value God's declarations on morality?
Every atheist philosopher I have read or debated on this subject has acknowledged that if there is no God, there is no objective morality.
Given a specific definition of morality, things can be either objectively right or wrong, but there is no objective definition of morality, because definitions are arbitrary, they're subjective. We decide what words mean. So we decide what morality, the word, means. You have defined morality to be something along the lines of that which conforms with God's will, but that is a subjective definition. If I were to accept that definition, we could then make the case that if God's will is such, it is objectively the case that something is right or wrong, but that is still contingent on the acceptance of a subjective definition. And I reject your definition on the grounds that it has no practical utility, because God doesn't have a will, because God doesn't real.
Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality.
No, Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the belief that a God of morality has certain whims, The existence of such a God isn't relevant. And even if it were, the existence of a God would not make his declarations on morality the objectively correct definition of morality, because an objective definition is a contradiction in terms.
In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is murder wrong?
Well, earlier in the video, I said murder was wrong. Why is God's position on murder more relevant than mine? Whatever answer you give to that question can be effectively boiled down to because you subjectively value God's definition more than mine. You yourself have not escaped the dilemma that you have proposed to me, and I don't much see it as a dilemma. You do, because you think moral statements can only be justified if they come from a moral authority. So substantiate that position. What is it about God that distinguishes him from me that makes his opinions objective and mine mere opinion?
Otherwise, all morality is opinion.
How can you make the leap from God says so to it is no longer an opinion?
You can't. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
If objective morality as defined by the whim of God is the foundation for Western civilization, we should expect to see God's values reflected in our laws. And what does God value? If you've read any of his best-selling books, the answer should be obvious. God values himself, significantly more than he values human flourishing, well-being, or even life. God values himself. So if we were to model our laws off of the values of God, which would make sense if we considered God to be the objective standard of morality, we should expect blasphemy to be the most serious offense any person could undertake. Now, there are Western countries that have blasphemy laws, which is unfortunate, but so far as I'm aware, there are no Western countries that have blasphemy laws as stringent as laws against murder, rape, or theft, which should be lesser offenses if we were to model our laws based on God's whims. Western civilization flourishes in spite of religiosity, not because of it.
Now, let me make two things clear. First, this doesn't mean that if you don't believe in God, you can't be a good person. There are plenty of kind and moral individuals who don't believe in God and Judeo-Christian values.
There shouldn't be, because as previously stated, the prime Judeo-Christian value should be belief in God. If not even belief in God, worship, groveling towards God. So a blasphemer, which would be anyone who doesn't believe in God, would be worse than a murderer, than a rapist, than a thief. Being a blasphemer should make you not a good person. So the existence of good blasphemers is evidence against the notion that God's values define morality.
But the existence of these good people has nothing to do with the question of whether good and evil really exist if there is no God.
Why is murder wrong?
There is a God who says murder is wrong.
God says non-belief is wrong. How do you reconcile this with the existence of good non-believers?
You can't. Second, there have been plenty of people who believed in God who were not good people.
You don't say.
Indeed, more than a few have been evil and have even committed evil in God's name.
Have you read Job by any chance? Maybe they were following his example. When God murders and tortures people, that's not evil. When humans murder and torture one another, that is evil, even if they were inspired by God to do it. What are Judeo-Christian values if not the values exemplified by the Judeo-Christian God? I'm getting the distinct impression that you're conflating Judeo-Christian values with the good values. Not murdering one another's a good value to have. That's a Judeo-Christian value. Huh, rape's pretty bad. Not raping people. Yeah, that's a Judeo-Christian value. You're crediting your religion of choice with extremely basic human values.
The existence of God doesn't ensure people will do good. I wish it did. The existence of God only ensures that good and evil objectively exist and are not merely opinions.
So what? If good and evil have no impact on human behavior, then this seems completely indistinct from you just clamoring to take ownership over certain words. All right, have good and evil. I just don't care about good and evil then. Because I don't care about what aligns with God's values. I have my own values that I seek to maximize. Why are you making a point to waste everyone's time over a thought experiment that has no practical applications?
Without God, we therefore end up with what is known as moral relativism, meaning that morality is not absolute, but only relative to the individual or to the society.
As opposed to moral absolutism, where morality is relative to God. Wait.
Without God, the words good and evil are just another way of saying I like and I don't like.
God like. God don't like.
If there is no God, the statement murder is evil is the same as the statement I don't like murder.
God don't like murder. How long are we going to do this?
Now, many will argue that you don't need moral absolutes. People won't murder because they don't want to be murdered. But that argument is just wishful thinking.
What is this about needing moral absolutes? You made the case that we don't need those things when you said,
the existence of God doesn't ensure people will do good. I wish it did. The existence of God only ensures that good and evil objectively exist and are not merely opinions.
If a behavior being evil doesn't dissuade people from engaging in that behavior, there is no benefit to accepting your version of moral absolutism.
Hitler, Stalin, and Mao didn't want to be murdered, but that hardly stopped them from murdering about 100 million people. It is not a coincidence that the rejection of Judeo-Christian values in the Western world by Nazism and communism led to the murder of all these innocent people.
Are you making the case that Stalin, Hitler, and Mao were moral relativists? Because I don't think they were. I think they thought they were objectively morally correct. Theistic Judeo-Christian moral absolutism and moral relativism are not the only two options.
It is also not a coincidence that the first societies in the world to abolish slavery, an institution that existed in every known society in human history, were Western societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values.
So what portions of Judeo-Christian teachings condemn slavery, and are those canceled out by all the portions of Judeo-Christian teachings that endorse slavery? A Christian society that abolishes slavery is not necessarily a society that abolished slavery because it was Christian. Why would a Christian society ever have slavery?
And so were the first societies to affirm universal human rights, to emancipate women, and to proclaim the value of liberty.
Second, third, and fourth verses, same as the first.
So then, whatever you believe about God or religion, here is a fact.
You should always take statements more seriously when they're prefaced with the word fact.
Without a God who is the source of morality, morality is just a matter of opinion. So, if you want a good world, the death of Judeo-Christian values should frighten you.
Which Judeo-Christian values should I be afraid of losing? All of them? Not all of them, because I don't like all of them. Some of them? Sure, there are some of them that I like, but I wouldn't consider those specifically Judeo-Christian values, and I don't value them because there's a God that tells me to value them. You think a good world and a Christian world are the same thing because that is how you define good. Per that definition, I do not want a good world, and you cannot frighten me into one.
In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is wrong, is murder wrong.